decisions about our economic future that we made against the backdrop of record unemployment figures out this week, power cuts, and the threat of a downgrade by Moody's later this week. Growth is becoming more elusive than ever. The economy shrank unexpectedly by 3.1% in the first quarter of this year. GDP growth for 2019 is expected to come in at a mere 0.6%. We'll be looking into all of these issues with our esteemed panel here. But first, let's have a look into Finance Minister Tito Mboweni, who's a very thin line to walk in this medium-term budget.
All eyes will be on South Africa's Minister of Finance, Tito Mboweni, as he presents the country's medium-term budget statement. The statement sets out the government's financial priorities for the next 3 years. At the top of the agenda is how the government plans to fund ailing state-owned entities like Eskom, National Carrier SAA, and soon to be set up National Health Insurance. Minister Mboweni shared these challenges in Parliament earlier this month.
The Minister of Finance is burdened with having to find resources for Eskom, for South African Airways, South African Express, Dinel, Alexco, and then a huge bill for the compensation of employees.
The government has committed in the next 3 to 5 years to give Eskom an additional 230 billion rand. SAA is in need of 21 billion rand, and National Health Insurance is estimated to require an additional 165 billion by 2026.
Also, you were down in Cape Town amongst the powerful. Could you just give us an idea of what you're feeling, what we're going to get in this budget?
So actually, I was there yesterday. So that was a discussion of the Eskom board with a standing committee on appropriations. And I think from a business perspective, what we'd like to see on the budget, let me first and foremost say that it is good that the Eskom paper has come out, because I think from a policy certainty perspective, it therefore seeks to give, that certainty and that direction in terms of what it is that we intend to do with Eskom. Because I think the biggest fear of business, and biggest discomfort of business at the moment, both local and international, is precisely what our plan is around Eskom. So we're hoping that the numbers to support that Eskom paper that came out yesterday, today from Finance Minister Tito Mboweni are therefore going to, speak to that. But I think the big elephant around the room, in as far as the SOEs broadly, is precisely, the money that we keep on putting into these SOEs, which have got no, determinable, ROI, and I think the huge, feeling and consensus is that we seem to be throwing money down the drain.
We should actually have a look at what we were doing 10 years ago at the end of Thabo and Becky's reign. 10 years ago, the formal unemployment rate was at 21%, but the expanded unemployment rate was actually at 29%. Now our formal unemployment rate is at 29%. Our expanded is close to 40%, and that means that there are more people who need social assistance, social welfare, besides the growth of the population, right? The point is you can't cut them off, and I don't think we want to reduce their benefits either, but the problem is we could have given them so much more, and there could have been seen so many that were included in the economy if we had not had this last decade, as Sir Ramaphosa calls it. So, to really answer your question, this is probably one of the most difficult budgets yet, because one of the things that needs to happen is we're talking about current expenditure now, social grants. There's also the other side of it, which is obviously civil servant salaries and wages. And again, not cutting the people that we need, and certainly not the low income earners in the police, the teachers areas, but rather looking at the higher echelons of government, salary freezes there, but certainly freezing of hiring as well. Issues again at Eskom. The big thing for us is looking on the other side of the fence. What is actually happening to promote economic growth in South Africa?
Give legs to the policy reforms that the President has mentioned. Give legs to the paper that he issued a couple of months ago. I would also say, remember, we are missing out on what the IMF said the emerging market growth rate is. It's way above the 0.7 that they forecast for South Africa for this year. I'd say we are running out of road. You must have a turnaround plan for SOE that is supported by the numbers. I agree with what Busi said earlier. Also, can we have some clarity on Eskom?
2 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 6. As I've said somewhere, we need to rock the boat. We need to shake the baobab tree. We need to do the unusual. We need to disrupt the comfort zones to get things moving. What is the state of the world? After a decade-long economic expansion, growth in advanced economies is expected to slow. in parts due to trade tensions and the Brexit uncertainty. The International Monetary Fund estimates that these tensions may take away 0.8 percentage points from global growth. Economic growth in both China and India is expected to slow to about 6.1% this year. Growth in both these countries accelerated after far-reaching structural reforms. The average person in China today is 7 times richer than 25 years ago. There are some signs that investment spending is strengthening. In the second quarter, growth in gross fixed capital formation rebounded to 6.1%. Mining grew by 14.4%. In real terms, credit growth has been positive since late 2018. Private sector credit extension rose 6.2% in September. The main changes to the in-year expenditure projections are, firstly, 26 billion rand in additional financial support to Eskom. Secondly, 11 billion rand to several smaller state-owned companies in financial distress. Thirdly, 430 million rand approved through the budget facility for infrastructure for student housing. These increases are partly offset by drawing on the contingency reserve, provisional allocations, and declared unspent funds. That said, savings from the compensation measures announced in the budget in February have not materialized as expected. Thus, in total, non-interest spending rises by 23 billion rand this year relative to the February estimates. If we exclude Eskom support, non-interest spending would have been 2.9 billion rand less than expected. For the foreseeable future, cabinet, premiers, MEC salaries will be frozen at current levels, with the likelihood of further negotiations. 2, the cost.
What's the point of
My humble
order?
apologies, Minister. Deputy Speaker, there's someone taking a video from the ANC benches there.
No.
With the flashlight taking a video and pictures there.
Honorable member, if you're doing that, you're out of order and you know it.
It is a member with the blue there. At the back, second row from the back.
And the whips will attend to that, please. We want to know who that is so that we act on them. Honorable Minister, please proceed.
Well, South Africa's Finance Minister has just delivered his medium-term budget policy statement. And of course, what we did here in the budget policy statement, which is a very important piece of South Africa's budgeting process, is that the minister did warn that South Africans spend more than we earn. He asked how we fix it. He answered this by saying that to stabilize debt, government would target a primary balance by 2022-2023. And the target measure excludes support to Eskom because that is the part of a separate process. He also said that government will deal with the wage bill among other measures. But will it be enough to stave off a Moody's downgrade on Friday?
Yeah, the markets reacted quite negatively. The rand was about 14.60 up at about 14.90 now. Bond yields have moved up about 20 basis points. So the 10-year just prior to the budget was sitting around 8.90. It's now about 9.10. So definitely a negative reaction to Tito Mboweni's very realistic budget forecasts. If you look at the numbers, they're not totally out of line with what economists were forecasting, but it's a massive deterioration where early in the year, we were expecting budget deficits of close to 4%. We're now seeing budget deficits above 6% for the next few years. Debt to GDP was supposed to flatline at around 60. We're now hitting 60 as near as February 2020, with a likelihood that we're going to be up at 70% debt to GDP ratio by the time we get to 22-23. So this dose of reality, the market's not very happy having looked at the forecasts.
What is a little bit disappointing for me is that we had to wait until now to actually get an answer. In February, in the budget speech, they already mentioned that by March there would be some kind of plan on the table. So the plan that we saw released yesterday, I was hoping to actually see in March. There wasn't anything that wasn't already kind of speculated about in the market and that we weren't expecting. They have set themselves a couple of stretch targets, so to have the boards for the 3 entities in place by March of next year. If they can do that, I think that would already send a good signal that they're moving in the right direction. But if you look at, for example, the list of criteria that they've put forward to Eskom to say, listen, you need to adhere to X, Y, and Z in terms of the money that we've provided you. I almost feel that these are things that should have been done in any event.
If you look at some of the structural changes that have happened in some of the other economies, they've done well because they focus on infrastructure spend. Yeah. They've spent before the income or the growth came through. And I think that's a positive in terms of what we're looking at. But also we have to be very careful because one thing is putting the money down, the other thing is spending it correctly. I mean, if you look at our education system, we've changed our forms of education so many times over the last year. I think our poor kids are confused these days. I mean, you don't know what they're learning, the curriculum changes all the time. So we need some stability in terms of how we go forward. But like you said, I mean, we have to invest behind certain core infrastructure of the country to bring in tourism, to bring in agriculture, and to make sure we're able to push our products not only in South Africa, but across the African continent.
But what could he have done here that he missed out on, in your view?
I think that it's not actually what he missed on. Is, for example, they must do things differently. Things have been easier in the past, but now they're getting tougher and tougher each year. For example, the NPA must do things differently to encourage people to rely on the South African government that it can deliver. This revenue office must also do things differently to collect more money, do things that they've never done before, become more efficient, use technology better. And I hope this money that they've given to them will help them improve their technology in order to collect more money and also to enhance their investigation capability as well, because it will help them to collect more.
I think Moody's has been very generous to us, and I think that's unlikely to last. It was a very difficult budget. It's a thankless task. But at the same time, I think we also need to keep our eye on how the Treasury is dealing with these pressures, and in particular, I think try to protect employment, try to protect service delivery, and pay a lot of attention to where the Treasury does actually cut in expenditure.
Ooh, so much more still to unpack. Take a break after this short break.
Welcome back to our medium-term budget statement coverage here on CNBC Africa. Well, if you're a loyal taxpayer in South Africa, are you going to sleep easier tonight? The Finance Minister, Tito Mboweni, had a few encouraging words about the state-owned enterprises and the way they'll be running the future, but were those words enough? The government has poured billions of rand into state-owned enterprises down the years and is likely to pour billions more, according to the Finance Minister's speech today. Before we start this conversation, we've all been talking about the rand on the way in. Let's just have a quick check-in to see how it's doing on the strength of the Finance Minister's words. I'm sure there you are. So 15, it's over. So that's something nearly 2.5%. So that is an indication.
The significant pronouncement coming from the medium-term budget policy statement is that government is now paying more attention to the rolling out of the infrastructure fund, which was announced by the minister in his budget speech in Feb, to say government is going to allocate 100 billion on the infrastructure fund, but it's a blended finance fund because they now want the private sector to also contribute to the fund. And it's good that he announced progress made so far regarding the appointment of Dr. Sean Phillips, who's now going to drive the implementation of the infrastructure fund housed within the Development Bank of Southern Africa.
I think on the state-owned enterprises, it was very clear that some of the measures are not really working. the government keeps on bailing out the state-owned entities, more especially Eskom. I like the comment that he made about SAA to say we can have an equity partner, that it can be bailed out, but the issue of Eskom, we cannot leave it alone, because once we leave Eskom alone, the whole economy is going to collapse. So the other takeaway was on the public wage bill, I think, which is significantly close to 40%. But I'm not sure of the measures that he put in place, such as freezing the salaries of public servants, whether those things are going to work or not.
The issue of Eskom is not going to be a quick fix, and I think that it is clear by this pronouncement by the minister that the state is going to back Eskom, so which is a good news. I think that on the other side, the pronouncement were also in line with the recent IRP that was issued actually earlier this week, and we believe that going in that direction, and just like the professor just mentioned, focusing on changing the business model of Eskom from an integrated utility to a more distributed distribution center, lighter assets, more nimbler as an organization, will definitely prepare Eskom for the future.
We end this segment. Karabo Latlatla has been out there talking to the people on the streets about what they think about this medium-term budget statement. Let's have a listen, see what he came up with.
South African economy is important for Southern Africa. It's both a magnet, also it stimulates growth in the region. So having listened to the areas that the mini budget has addressed, particularly the power issues around Eskom, that is a big driver for the economy. So I think if we get the numbers right, yes, we are on the right trajectory. Also, the talk around South African Airways is also important, because we depend on people coming and they bring revenue, which SARS wants to collect. So you see that all these three areas are intertwined. And I think if we, like I said, if we get it right, and having listened to what he has said, I think we're on the right path.
But the minister keeps talking about getting SOEs off of government's books. But SOEs are on government's books. Do you believe that that time will come when they're not? I mean, is the trajectory, as it were, suggesting that that is around the corner?
Yeah. You see, government always has a problem. They have to look at the economy, but also be mindful of the people that are employed in those areas, so that if government takes away support too quickly, it will collapse the economy, but it will also affect people.
You are tuned into the segment that is focused on the business aspects of Tito Mboweni's budget speech. The speech highlighted that state-owned companies, public entities, and the private sector's boards and executive management compensation and benefits should be reduced. The finance minister also spoke on government and the private sector working together to successfully implement the infrastructure fund. So far, the commentary is that, there's no way that Moody's can't take a tougher hand on South Africa, and that for me just means that we could possibly be seeing numbers whereby we see business confidence currently at around 20-year lows deteriorate even further. Is that the case, Kanki?
I think the biggest challenge of government over the years is implementation. Some of these plans that have been mentioned today have been mentioned in Feb, but not much has been implemented. To give you an example, we're talking about reforming SOCs, state-owned enterprises, but the major SOCs have got acting CEOs. There's no way you're going to improve decision-making in SOCs if people are on an acting capacity. So for us, I don't understand what stops government from filling those positions.
And with the right people.
Yeah, obviously with the right people. But I'm a bit worried when people are saying we must not pay incentive bonuses and all those things, because then it means government is going to struggle to attract the right people. So
but their wage bill is already quite high. If you looked at the 66% increase in their wage bill versus flat in the private sector, I think the salaries there are quite good. But I want to agree with the earlier point around implementation. That's one. But the minister opened by talking about shaking the baobab tree, thinking out of the box, doing things differently. But I don't see a huge amount of evidence of that happening on government side. So a lot of this is the same narratives about what do we do with the SOEs, where are the great small business plans? We know that for young unemployed people, the most likely place for them to get their first job is in a small business.
If we do freeze some of the other benefits and the incentives of getting guys into some of the acting roles that you're talking about at state-owned enterprises, that I can get a better pay package in the private sector. My question to you is where does country duty step in? Because right now we are in a crisis. And also, what is the opportunity cost of you getting an incentive and getting a benefit? Because that's diverting money away from a school that needs to be built, hospitals, road infrastructure that needs to be put in place.
Yeah, I think that is not necessarily true. Because if you run the company very well, efficiently, even if you get your incentive bonus, but that is linked to you achieving certain objectives, you may make a serious saving that can be taken back to service delivery.
But if you're running a profitable company, right now these entities, many of them are not.
Hence we are saying, let's bring the best out of us. Let's put our best foot forward when we hire these CEOs who are going to run and turn around these companies. Because if you don't take the best and put the best there, we are going to be where we are. So if you want to get to a situation where even if you give these SOCs loans, they will be able to pay back that loan. You need them to be run by the best. But if you give a loan to an SOC run by a mediocre person, they run it down, government is still going to lose.
What we have seen is the rand continuing to weaken against the dollar. That number there up on your screen. So we have officially breached that 15 rand mark to the dollar. And that's as a result of that medium-term budget policy statement showing that South Africa's deficit was rising very sharply. And just judging by the reaction of the rand, that this budget, it really missed expectations by quite a long mark. I'm interested in what you went in thinking and hoping that the finance minister would say, and how far and how different it is from what we actually do read. Adrian?
What I was hoping for was no poetry and just calling it as you see it, or calling it as it is. We're done with the poetry. We're done with the storytelling, and South Africa is in a very tough place. We are in a fiscal straitjacket, and I think the two places to go to for sort of the reading of the tea leaves on the medium-term statement would be the bond market and the rand, as you point out. And the rand went the wrong side of 15, and the bond market went from 820 to 840. And in sympathy, equities, especially banks, went softer, but it would be the rand and the bond market that, to me, call it as they see it.
I think the next 12 months is make or break for SA. This will give us the opportunity to implement some of these reforms, to at least get growth in line with population growth, because we're still below population growth. The minute we can do that, then at least we can stabilize the increase in unemployment rate. That is achievable. We can do that in the next year. So we need to take small steps, but I do think in time we can do that, just to stabilize the social environment, prevent unemployment from increasing further, and then address some of these issues to hopefully get growth going. Again, I think, the minister, this wasn't really a political budget, because he said exactly what he wanted to say, and he almost pointed fingers to some of the other departments. The challenge is now that by handing over that baton, in terms of, again, the implementation, will some of those factions be willing to make the hard decisions? He was quite brave to almost highlight the elephant in the room, which is the wage bill. But it's not him that's going to make the decision in terms of, not giving salary increases or, in fact, reducing the headcount. He's handing that over to some of the politicians. And that's where we need to see the willingness to really make a difference.
From a point of companies that are already generating revenue offshore, it's another difficult one, because as you've seen in the last, 12 to 18 months, even those companies have come a cropper, right? And not through necessarily their own faults. Like some of those companies are particularly good South African companies, Mediclinic comes to mind. And through no fault of their own, they've expanded, but then had the rug pulled out from under their feet because of a change in regulation, for example, or a change in the way the consumer is reacting. And also we are facing global headwinds, right? There's no doubt we're at a late stage in the economic cycle. So I would say be cautious, be on the safe side, or play on the safer side of the asset pool, rather than trying to find these rand hedges that are going to do so well because we expect the rand to blow out.
That's where we leave it for the post-budget analysis of the mid-term budget policy statement. I mean, really, it's not game over. It's not all doom and gloom, but there's a lot of tough decisions and there's a lot of implementing that will need to take place for us to be this time next year sitting and looking at a better picture of South Africa. From us here at CNBC Africa, thanks so much for watching. It's bye for now.